Hi, my name's Savita and I'm a dietitian and patient advocate. And today, let's talk through the basics of how to eat balanced meals on an anti-inflammatory diet. So the most common dietary pattern that I work people towards in clinic is an anti-inflammatory diet. But one of the most common questions I get is, how do I actually put meals together using this dietary pattern? So that's what we're going to go through today. And just as a disclaimer, I'm just a dietitian. This is just general advice. If you'd like specific advice, please go and see a healthcare practitioner before making any changes. So we'll go over these 3 points today. Firstly, what is an anti-inflammatory diet? Secondly, what are balanced meals? And lastly, how we can all put it together and do some meal planning. So what is an anti-inflammatory diet? So an anti-inflammatory diet is a way of eating that reduces overall inflammation in the body. And it does this by focusing on whole foods and plant foods mostly. And that's because these foods are very nutrient dense. So they have macronutrients, so carbs, proteins, and fats, but also the vitamins and minerals to keep our body running and to support our immune system in a way that replenishes stocks and reduces inflammation. And overall, there's not just one way to do an anti-inflammatory diet. It can look different between two very different people. And what I love about it is it can be adapted to different cultural groups and other scenarios. So whether that's financial budget or taste and preferences. So it's not prescriptive. And once you understand the basics, you can really adapt it to what you're already doing. So who can an anti-inflammatory diet help? To be honest, most people. Most diseases and illnesses have an aspect of inflammation woven into them. So by eating in a way that helps to reduce that, we can actually start to support a lot of different symptoms. And I guess an anti-inflammatory diet is good because it also supports our gut microbiome to be nice and healthy, as well as our immune system. And what that means is better energy, better mental health overall, concentration and health resilience, among a couple of other points. And we'll delve into all of those throughout this little video. So firstly, how can diet actually reduce inflammation? So there's many different factors contribute to inflammation, and there's many small indirect or direct and indirect ways which nutrition can help. So nutrition helps to support balanced blood sugar levels. So when we eat balanced meals, we get a nice steady rise and fall in our blood sugar level. And what that means is we don't get as much of a stress response. So when we have very high highs and low lows in our blood sugar level, our body actually produces a stress response, which can then further aggravate inflammation. Secondly, nutrition provides the nutrients needed for metabolism. So all of the different reactions going on in our body. And of course, if we do have inflammation, pretty much every process in the body requires nutrients as a toll. So the more processes we have going on, the higher requirement we have for these tiny minerals and vitamins and phytonutrients even, which are things like antioxidants and the colorful parts of plants, which help our body to be ticking along nicely. And when we have deficiencies in those levels, that's when our body can be a bit more sluggish at reducing inflammation as well. Thirdly, gene expression. So genes can be turned on and off and by many different factors, but nutrition is one of those influencing factors. It also helps to foster a diverse gut microbiome. So when we eat food, it goes into our stomach, then our small intestine where most of the nutrients get absorbed, and then our large intestine before coming out of us. So in our large intestine, we actually have 10 times the number of bacterial cells than human cells that make up our entire body. So they have an absolutely massive say in what goes on in our body in terms of everything, but certainly inflammation is an immune system function is a huge part of that. So by having diverse range of plant foods, that really, really works to support a healthy gut microbiome. And also feeding into that regular bowel motions. So our bowels are one of the main ways of eliminating certain I guess, components. So whether that's things like old hormones and cholesterol. So regular bowel movements can really help to then promote gut microbiome health and just make us feel better. And in terms of what is actually an anti-inflammatory diet or what are the main principles, so we can kind of see on the left in this pyramid, we can see down the bottom, fruits and vegetables make up a really large part of that. So I know in Australia, we've had the 2 and 5 campaign, So aiming for 5 serves of vegetables and 2 serves of fruit a day. And that very much aligns with an anti-inflammatory way of eating. And I guess the next step are things like whole grains, nuts, and seeds. So whole grains, great source of healthy carbohydrates. They have a lot of fiber and vitamins and minerals wound up in that matrix. And nuts and seeds, again, great source of healthy fats. Got some protein in there as well. And then we've got a couple of different other protein sources. So not just having, I guess, a standard Australian diet, which is quite meat heavy, but also diversifying that. So making sure if you like fish, you have some fish and shell or fish and seafood in there. Or, you know, smaller amounts of red meat, also some lean meats, but also beans and legumes. So those vegetarian and vegan sources of protein as well. And then at the top, we've got a small amount of low-fat dairy, and then it focuses, I guess, on reducing things like alcohol, caffeine, sweets, and processed foods. So overall, you're going to be having less sugar, saturated fat, salt, and those sorts of things. And that combination of firstly increasing the good things and then reducing, I guess, discretionary foods really helps to reduce inflammation. Okay, so that brings us on to what actually are balanced meals. So the way I like to describe it in clinic is that they're kind of like this table here. We need all 4 legs in order to create balance. So the 4 legs are carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and fiber. So when we get this combination of carbohydrates, protein, fats, and fiber, we're actually going to support having stable blood sugar levels, energy, mood, and concentration, and lower levels of stress, pain, and hunger. And so depending on what outcomes you're interested in shifting or what symptoms you're trying to manage, this is really the combination to focus on. So carbs, protein, fats, and fiber, we'll be repeating that quite a bit throughout. So the way that so again, carbs, proteins, fats, and fiber. And the way, one way I like to tie this together for people is by using the healthy plate model, because it's all well and good saying to have these 4 elements, but what does that actually look like on a plate? Okay. Some people love it, some people hate it, but I personally think it's a really great tool to help portion your meals out and figure out what should I be putting and what quantity should I be putting in my meal. So if we imagined a plate as on the screen, we want half of it to be non-starchy vegetables, then we'd want a quarter of a plate of whole grains or low GI carbohydrates. So we'll go a bit more into glycemic index, and then quarter of a plate of lean protein. So when we have this combination of half a plate of veggies, fistful of carbs, fistful of protein, we're actually getting those carbs, proteins, fats, and fiber. So it's a really awesome way to tick off that balanced meal and make sure we're having everything. Of course, if you're having a meal which is mixed speak, so for example, a soup or a stew or a stir fry, it can get a little bit more tricky to visualize the healthy plate model in those settings, but still, you can still kind of roughly abstract use it, even when you're portioning out ingredients for when you're cooking. So it's a great ratio to have in the back of your mind. In saying that, let's dive in and have a look at the main food components, because when we start to break them out down and understand how they all work and what sorts of foods fit in those categories, it becomes a lot easier with meal planning and knowing how to put foods together. So macronutrients are the things that give us energy or calories. So there's actually 4. There's carbs, proteins, fats, and alcohol. But alcohol isn't essential, and we're not focusing on that. So ignoring that, we've got these 3. And we'll also have a look at fiber as well. So in terms of protein foods, protein plays a really big functional role in the body. So it's a part, I guess, amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein, are really the foundation of lots of different things in our body. And they also have a lot of functional roles. So in terms of building different parts of the body, repair, and also being part of quite a few hormones. So up here, we've got quite a wide variety of protein foods. So everything from what you typically think of, like your meats, all the way to other foods which have some protein, but also a mix of other macronutrients in. So for example, we've got our Greek yogurt, which also has protein, but also has some fat. We've got our lentils and legumes here, which of course have proteins in, but have some carbohydrate component as well. Nuts, similar to yogurt, they've got fats, but different sorts of fats and protein. And we've also got peanut butter, tofu, beans, and chickpeas. So these are just some protein examples, but a bit of variety from everything. So we can start to see what sorts of foods have protein in them. Protein's really great because it's satiating. So it helps to keep us full, and it also helps to stabilize our blood sugar level, which we'll go into when we talk about carbohydrates, which we're at now. So of course, carbohydrates are, I guess, we've got some carbohydrate examples here in this picture, but carbs are the #1 fuel source for the body. So carbohydrates get broken down into singular sugars, and sugar is the currency that our cells accept to make energy. So our brain exclusively runs off sugar, and our cells and everything else prefers to run off sugar. So what are carbohydrate containing foods? So we've got a bit of a list here. All fruits, so anything that tastes sweet, is going to generally have carbohydrates in it. All of our starchy vegetables, grains, cereals, whole grains, that could be any of those foods and anything that those foods are used in. So breakfast cereals, breads, pastas, the examples there. Dairy products, specifically the ones that contain lactose, because lactose is a sugar. And then we have legumes, and then what we class as extra foods. So any of those more processed foods or discretionary products. And I guess there's lots of different ways of divvying up whether carbohydrates are good or bad, or classifying them. And the way that I like to go is complex carbs versus refined carbs. So I don't like to class things as good or bad, because when we use that sort of language, we, I guess, create a lot of guilt and shame around the foods that we're eating, which is in some ways more harmful than eating those foods in the first place, psychologically. So in terms of complex carbs, they're the ones on the left. So they're generally in their more natural state. They're less processed, and because of that, they have generally got more fibre and nutrients, which on an anti-inflammatory diet is what we're after. On the other hand, we have refined carbohydrates. So some of the options are the ones on the right. They're definitely the more processed options on the spectrum. But in general, refined carbs are generally more processed. And because of that, they have less nutrients, less fiber, and they're higher in sugar. Okay, and that brings us on to how carbohydrates are actually used by our body. So let's break this down. So complex carbs, so those ones are wrapped up in fiber and other bits, are generally digested slower. So the analogy that I like to use in clinic is Lego bricks. So complex carbohydrates are kind of like this Lego pyramid that we have on the right. They're quite woven together, and they're trapped in a matrix of fiber and other things. Generally whole grains, they also have a couple of other nutrients in there, like they've got a bit of fats potentially, a little bit of protein, and that all binds the carbohydrate and means that it takes quite a bit longer for our body to break those down and to cleave the individual sugars off the chain of carbohydrate. And because of that, I guess when we eat, starts in our mouth, goes down our esophagus into our stomach. Then in our small intestine, that's where the fun happens. So that's where most of our nutrients are extracted. And once the carbohydrate has been broken down into individual sugars, those sugars can then enter the bloodstream. And the bloodstream is like the highway of the body. It goes absolutely everywhere and delivers the sugar to the cells, which then use it to make energy. You know, the slower that these carbohydrate foods are broken down. So again, going back to the pyramid, if we think of the pyramid, it's going to take, if we give that to a kid, it's going to take a bit longer for the kid to break it apart, because they've got to break off each brick individually and disassemble it. So it's going to keep them satisfied and busy for a little bit longer. So if we think about, sugars getting broken down like that, we're going to have a much slower and more gentle rise in the sugars being released into the bloodstream. Okay. On the other hand, we've got more refined carbohydrates. So I'd liken them to that singular stack of Lego bricks on the left. So, they're generally just single, very shorter strands of sugars. So, and because of that, they're a lot quicker to cleave apart by the body. So what that means is that we've got a much quicker transferal rate of the sugars from our intestine to our bloodstream. And because of that, we get a quicker rise in our blood sugar level. Okay, and now we're going to look at blood sugar levels. So this is a very oversimplified, I guess, way of looking at this. But kind of what we were talking about before, we can see on the left with refined carbohydrates, if we have a portion of refined carbohydrates, this isn't the case for all refined carbohydrates, but for particularly if you're just eating them on their own or you're having a bigger portion of them, you're going to get a quick rise in your blood sugar level. So think of it as, maybe having a rough day at work and you have a Kit Kat and a hot chocolate to try and perk you up. The sugar from those it's quite quick for your body to break down because it's already in quite a short form, rises your blood sugar level rapidly. And so, when you're on that rise, you might feel quite energized, quite focused. And then what happens is our body releases a hormonal cascade. So insulin is part of that. And what that does is it pulls our blood sugar level down by taking the blood sugar from the bloodstream to the cells. So, or it can get taken to the liver for storage as well. So in saying that, it's trying to get the sugar into the cells to then create more energy. But what happens then is that means that we have less sugar in the blood. So our blood sugar level drops. And when that process is happening as well, usually we get another hormonal cascade, which then contributes to an inflammatory stress response. So we also get some cortisol release sometimes and adrenaline, and they can just continue to fuel inflammatory signals going on in the body. When we then go down the bottom of the crash, so you can imagine having a Kit Kat and a hot chocolate at work, 2 hours later, you're going to start feeling or losing focus. You might feel tired, a little bit moody or hangry. And that's very indicative of being in a blood sugar, a bit of a low. And the trouble is with refined carbohydrates, and when we're not balancing these out with things like fats, proteins, and fiber, it's very easy to get into this cycle of relying on sugary things to give us energy, then crashing, and then again, having to have something sugary to perk you back up. So that's where sticking back to this model of trying to have carbs, proteins, fats, and fiber every meal really more supports a picture towards the right. So in terms of complex carbs, like I said before, we're going to get a slower transferal of sugar from the intestines to the bloodstream. What that means is there's a more gradual and slow rise. Because we've got a more gradual and slow rise, we have a more gradual and slow fall, and they're much more spaced out than the other blood sugar high and lows. So what that means when we've got kind of stable energy levels that go up and down is that we're going to have stable energy and mood levels. And we're also not getting those stress responses happening in the body from the blood sugar level causes. So what that means, overall, less inflammation, which is good. So I guess the other things that support, more stable blood sugar levels are again combining carbohydrates with fats, proteins, and fiber. So as I said before, protein helps to keep us full. Fats slow the release of food from the stomach to the small intestine and generally slow down digestion a bit more. And so does fiber as well. And what that means is just overall, we're going to have a nice gradual release of energy, which will last us hopefully until our next snack or meal, if we're having enough. Okay. Oh, and just the last point as well. So the single biggest factor that influences how much your blood sugar rises and how quickly is the portion of carbohydrates, which is why we can actually have a small portion of refined carbohydrates if we also pair it with fats, proteins, and carbs. But just again, keeping in mind the portion size. So I guess on the other hand, even if we had a really big portion of complex carbs, our body might kind of see it like the picture on the left. So just because it's complex, just because it's wrapped up in things, it doesn't mean that if we have a really big portion, our bodies can actually push up our blood sugar levels. So I guess there's two parts. There's firstly the types of things you're eating, and then secondly, the portion size. Okay. And now I'm going to show you one of my favorite resources to give to clients in clinic. Okay, so this is a resource from Baker IDI on carbohydrates and glycemic index. Oh yeah, so that concept that I described before in terms of how much food raise someone's blood sugar levels is referred to as glycemic index. So the foods that rise blood sugar more rapidly are high GI foods. So I think they've got a section here. So yeah, increase blood sugar levels more rapidly. So it looks like the line, which is red. as compared to low GI foods, which are the ones that increase blood sugar levels more slowly. And so that's the blue line there. So I really like this resource because it goes through kind of step by step what we've talked about, but in a little bit more detail. So going through what carbohydrates are, again, that concept of glycemic index. And then this is the part that I love. So it goes over, I guess, common sorts of foods and less healthy options and more healthy options if glycemic index is something we want to consider as part of our diet. So they've got some really great options there and just things that start to get you thinking. Because often once, you've got a piece of paper with some ideas on it, it's quite easy to come up with meals from there. It can certainly be a bit easier. And then down the bottom, what I really like is that they always include some type of meal ideas. So when we look at these, we can start to see how they're incorporating those more complex carbohydrates into different meals. And I love these because most of them as well are actually balanced. So they have that combination of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and fiber. So just for example, let's pick, I don't know, let's go for the top one. So muesli with reduced fat, no added sugar yogurt. So, if it's non-toasted muesli, potentially depending on the type of muesli, they've got some ideas in this sheet, but a bit higher up. You've got oats, which are a great source of fiber and carbohydrates. Hopefully you have some sort of nut in there as well, or seed, which again provides some healthy fats and a bit more protein. And then you're combining that with some yogurt. So especially with lower fat, lower sugar yogurt, it's going to have quite a bit more protein in there. So overall, that's going to be quite a filling meal. So that's a really great option and is going to help contribute to stable blood sugar levels. Let's see, let's pick a lunch option. So, soup with barley, tomato broth, and plenty of low carbohydrate vegetables. So again, barley is a whole grain, so an amazing source of fiber and carbohydrates with a little bit of protein, and tomato broth and veggies, so that definitely brings the fiber. We could probably add a little bit more protein to this one and maybe some healthy fats. So you might add a tin of chickpeas and you might drizzle a little bit of olive oil on top of that, and that would make an awesome balanced meal. And let's say for dinner, so I've got an option here, which is grilled salmon with sweet potato and steamed veggies. So this really hits all the marks. So we've got the salmon, which protein and healthy fats. Sweet potato is carbs, veggies, fiber. So that's a really great example of a balanced meal. So we'll jump back into the presentation now, and we'll just go over the last few food elements. So fiber, again, it's not a macronutrient, it doesn't contribute to energy, but it's the indigestible part of carbohydrate. So I guess fiber is really important for lots of different reasons. It's the main thing that our gut microbiome eat. So it really helps to foster a positive ecosystem in the gut. And I guess the gut microbiome is kind of like a garden. When we're nourishing, the good flowers and good grass, we're not going to have so many of those weeds growing through. And particularly in our gut microbiome, if we have an excess growth of what we call gram-negative bacteria, that's when we can have some of the more adverse effects in terms of inflammation and immunity. There's also a couple of different types of fiber. So there's insoluble fiber. So they're the parts of plants that traditionally feel quite fibery. So if you think of, a corn cob, the outside, the yellow outside of that corn cob, or asparagus, it's the stringy part of the asparagus. Whereas on the other hand, we've got soluble fiber, which are all of our gooey, sticky fibers. So things like oats, chia, legumes, whole grains. Often they have a combination of both of them, but so fiber also stimulates our gallbladder to secrete bile. And bile is really awesome because apart from its roles are mostly to do with breaking down fats and proteins in the small intestine, but it's also a natural laxative. So it helps move our bowels much more quicker. And it's also the trash chute for several different things in the body, like estrogen and cholesterol. So works towards lowering levels of those too. So that's why getting in more fiber, particularly the soluble stuff, is generally good. But of course, this is where also checking with a healthcare practitioner is really good, because some people just can't tolerate more fiber or have problems with different types of fibers. But generally, the ballpark that we need to aim for is around 30 grams of fiber a day. but that's a pretty arbitrary number. So let's break down what 30 grams could look like. So we've got this chart here. Each of these serves of food has 7 grams of fiber in them. So even if I was just to think across the day, I could have something like maybe wheat bix. Oh no, let's go for the baked beans. You might have half a cup of baked beans on 2 slices of toast for brekkie. Might have a pear for morning tea and an apple for afternoon tea. And then with dinner, I might have a baked potato with the skin on, and probably not a whole broccoli because that's quite a lot, but I might have, say, a third of that. So even across the day, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 and a bit. So that's probably, yeah, that's bang on 30 grams of fiber in one day. So really, it's actually quite achievable. And the last component or pillar that we're going to be talking about is fats. So fats, again, have really main roles in structure and function in the body. So, keeping our cells together. They play a huge role in the cell wall, but also with hormone levels. Okay, so we've learned about a lot of biochemistry now. And I guess that will really help us to inform how to plan having balanced meals. So this is a really easy exercise that you can do. So we've just got a column for each of those pillars: carbs, proteins, fats, and fiber. And what I want you to do is just to list healthy sources of all of those foods, which you like eating and you generally have in the pantry or can get easily. And then from there, once we build up a good stock of food components that we have around the house, it becomes quite easy to build a meal. Whether it's picking across the columns and trying to do different combinations of foods, or whether it's, say, finding one of the foods and building a meal around that using the principles that you've learned. And again, what this just starts to do is build into your mind the idea of ticking off mentally whether you've got fats, proteins, carbs, and fiber in each of your meals. So this just becomes really handy for, I guess, jazzing up our meals and making sure that they're balanced. So what I'd recommend is pick a meal that you're already having. So for example, I might be having wheat bix and milk for breakfast, but I want to make it a bit more anti-inflammatory. So have a think: wheat bix and milk. So in terms of wheat bix and milk, I'm getting carbohydrates from wheat bix, getting a little bit of protein, from the wheat bix and the milk, and a little bit of saturated fat from the milk as well. Perhaps I have low fat milk, but we're really lacking, we're lacking a bit of protein potentially, or a bit of fat. There is some fiber from the wheat bix as well, but I reckon we can do a little bit better. So what we might want to do is, add some fruit in there. That will add some fiber, some wonderful nutrients, and a healthy source of fat. So I'm going through a huge tahini phase. Might put a dollop of that on top as well. But even something like peanut butter, flax seeds, chia seeds, all awesome options. So let's think of another option throughout the day. So I hope from this you can start to see how we build healthy meals using an anti-inflammatory diet, and how it can help to keep you fuller for longer, more satiated, and having stable energy and mood levels and less pain. Oh, yep. And one more note here. I guess snacks were a whole nother ballpark to meals, and they can just be really tricky. So again, Baker IDI has another awesome resource I refer clients to. It's got 5 pages of snack ideas, and most of them are balanced as well, or you can apply the same principles that we've talked about just to help jazz them up. But yeah, there's some really great ideas. So I hope you've managed to take something away from today, and I hope you have a bit more clarity and confidence about what a balanced meal look like and what it might look specifically like in your diet and lifestyle. So thank you so much for watching.